Right, okay. Thank you, Natasha.
Thank
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Alan Wilmot, and I'll be running you through the session this afternoon, which, as Natasha has already said, is the first in a series of 4 sessions looking at the DSPT, and the first section is staffing and roles. So, as Natasha has already said, um, please feel free to ask anything at any point. I'm quite happy to be interrupted as we work through if there's anything that's not making sense, etc. So let's just start by explaining the context for this. This session is part of the Better Security, Better Care offering. And Better Security, Better Care is a national programme funded by the NHS. Its overall aim is to help us make sure that adult social care providers have good data and cyber security in place. So it's not a complicated program. It's just got that one objective, which is to help you as social care providers look at your data and cybersecurity. But it does have an overarching objective, which is that good data and cybersecurity is the launching pad really for the integration of health and social care and being able to access all of the digital innovations that are coming through in terms of the sector at the moment. And so our primary focus is to help care providers to register on and complete the data security and protection toolkit, which hopefully you will understand is a self-assessment toolkit which helps to demonstrate good practice in the area of data and cybersecurity, and therefore is a prerequisite for lots of the digital offerings that are in place. So generally speaking, what we're here for is to help you to be able to complete the DSPT and to understand what it's there for and how it works, etc. And I just make reference to the Digital Care Hub, which is a dedicated space to provide support and advice on all things technology and data protection, specifically for the care sector. And I'll be referencing it several times as we go through the session, I suspect. So that's the context for the session. What are we going to be covering? We'll be covering what you need to have in place for this particular section of the DSPT, which is staff records and contracts. We'll be looking at why your business needs a suitably trained data security and protection lead, the importance of data protection and cybersecurity training for all staff, the need to carry out a training needs analysis, how to find the right training materials and providers for your needs, and then there are various links, etc., and where to find help. But in essence, where to find help is the Sussex Digital team. Right, so without further ado, let's move into the session per se. So in order to complete the DSPT, the first thing you'll need to do is to register with the DSPT. And once you've registered, you're then able to log into your account, which will then facilitate accessing the specific questions that we'll be covering. So if you haven't already registered, you will need to, and then you will need to set your organization profile. So in order to be able to do that, if you just put into your search engine, whatever it is, DSPT, then it will take you through to the DSPT homepage, and on the top right hand side it has 2 tabs. One is to register and one is to log in. So if you are registering for the first time, you click on the left hand one. If you've already got a registration set up, then just click on login. If you click on login, this is the screen that you will see. And so it asks you for the email address and the password of the person who's registered and set themselves up as administrator. It does say on the right-hand side, log in with NHS Mail. I would suggest it's preferable if you log in with your administrator details. If you log in with NHS Mail, then you will have to continue to log in with NHS Mail. So if your NHS Mail changes, etc., you won't be able to log in. Okay, so having got into the DSPT, you've registered, which is a simple process of providing contact details for whoever is going to be the administrator, just an email address and a password, and then they will send you an email link to actually set up your organisation profile, etc. So the organisation profile is a prerequisite to accessing the DSPT questions, and it will ask you a series of questions which defines what you actually see when you get through to the questions. And the way that works is that they will ask you what type of service you are. And there is a drop-down box with a series of descriptors of different types of services. And it will include hospitals, GP, dentists, pharmacists, etc. Because the DSPT doesn't just apply to social care, it applies to all people who provide a personal care service or health service to people who use the services. If you choose the social care option, then what it will do is strip out all of the questions from the DSPT that don't apply to a social care environment. So it makes it very specific to social care. So it's essential that you do choose the social care button in order to get to the right questions. It will then ask you about various key roles within your organization relating to data and cybersecurity. So it will ask you who your Caldecott Guardian is. It will ask you who your Senior Information Risk Officer is, who your Data Protection Officer is, and who your Information Governance Lead is. Now, these questions will have options next to them, and it's perfectly acceptable to leave the questions blank. So if you don't have a Senior Information Risk Officer or a Data Protection Officer, then you can leave those blank. They're not prerequisites in terms of a social care organisation by and large. Caldecott Guardian, you probably won't have, and so again, you can leave that blank. However, for the Information Governance Lead, you should have someone who takes overall responsibility for data protection and cybersecurity, etc. It will also ask if NHS Mail is the only email you use. And it doesn't matter what you respond there, whatever is the current situation is appropriate. And a couple of other questions around Cyber Essentials Plus, etc. But again, these questions are optional and they won't prevent you from proceeding to the questions itself. It's just about setting up the scene for your organisation. That will get you through to the social care view on the toolkit. As I said, if you've chosen social care, this is what you'll see. Complete your social care assessment for 23-24, which is just a reminder that it is an annual process. It's not a one-off activity. Completing the DSPT should be done at least once a year in order to ensure that it's current and still reflects your organisation. You can see at the top of the blue box on the slide there that there are 3 tabs in the darker blue strip. There is the assessment, report an incident, and admin. The assessment is the questions itself, which we'll be working through shortly. Report an incident is a direct link through to the Information Commissioner's office. So should you suffer a data breach of such a serious nature that it requires reporting, then you can use that tab to report it directly through to the ICO. And the admin button is where you can change your profile questions, should that change in the future, and where you can add other users to the toolkit should you wish to use more than one person to complete. And you can see down at the bottom of the slide that the first of the sections in the toolkit is staffing and roles, and that's the focus for this afternoon. So, what do the questions actually ask? So I'm going to work through the questions one by one, just explaining how they work and what you need to do in order to be deemed to be compliant with that particular question area. So the first of the questions is question 115, and it asks who has responsibility for data security and protection, and how has that responsibility been formally assigned? And you'll see that on the right-hand side of the question there, it says mandatory. Some of the questions have got mandatory next to them, some of them haven't. If you want to publish at standards met, you need to respond to all 42 questions within the toolkit. If you only respond to the mandatory questions, you will only be able to publish at approaching standards, and it will require you to submit an action plan stating how you will get to standards met. So I would suggest that it makes sense to try to complete all of the questions the first time round, and then you won't need to bother with an action plan, etc. So in order to respond to the question, you need to click on the blue text in order to open the full question, which is what you'll see on the bottom right hand of the screen there. So who has responsibility for data security and protection? How has this responsibility been formally assigned? So it makes the point within the text there that data security and data protection is everyone's business, and there must be a named person within your organization who takes overall senior responsibility for this whole area. So as I said, when you were setting the profile, the only question that you need to respond to there is who carries the can for data and cyber security in your organization. And this is a text box response. So at the bottom of the slide there, you'll see the black rectangle, and that's where you would type your response. So it's just simply a name and how responsibility is formally assigned within your organization. In terms of what that means for the organization, it's just a question of identifying who leads data security. So as stated, you will need a data security and protection lead. Depending on the size of your business, it may be the owner of the service or it may be the registered manager, depending on your particular arrangements. And it's usually incorporated into someone's role, but they will have additional knowledge and awareness around this particular theme. And various elements of the role can be delegated within the organization. So if someone's more au fait with the digital side of things, they could take the lead on cyber security, whereas the registered manager might take the overall lead on data protection. But there must be someone who carries overall responsibility for that, and that they must be named, and ideally it should be in their job description. So what are they there to do? Really, it's about ensuring that the individual's personal data rights are upheld, and they monitor the information handling to ensure compliance with the legislation, which is the Data Protection Act 2018 and GDPR. That they will be responsible for ensuring that your data protection policies and procedures are what they should be and that they are followed, etc. So they are probably the person who understands the DSPT most effectively, but they should be championing good data protection practice within the organization. So it will require that they have a reasonable knowledge and appropriate skills around this whole area. The specialist roles that I referred to when we were looking at the profile, the organization profile, are the data protection officer. And if you don't have one of those, that's not necessarily a problem, because under the legislation, only certain types of organizations must appoint a DPO. And I would suggest that for most social care providers, it's only likely to apply to large multi-site organizations because it's to do with the amount of data that you process. Caldecott Guardian I referenced, and again, the Caldecott Guardian role is a recommendation for social care. However, if the person who's responsible for data and cyber security feels that they can cover that role itself, it's not necessary to appoint a Caldecott Guardian. But their basic role is about acting as an advocate on behalf of the people who use the service to make sure that the organisation uses the data fairly and properly. So it is mandatory for NHS and local authorities, but not for social care providers. So the key area that you need to think about in terms of completing the DSPT at this stage is, do you know who is responsible for data security and protection within your organisation? Do you know if that's been formally assigned? And if so, you can respond to the question. If not, you need to find out in order to be able to put that name, that person's name, in the text box and complete the question. So moving on to the second of the questions, again, you can see on the right-hand side, this question is marked as mandatory. Does your organisation have an induction process that covers data security protection and cyber security? And this question is slightly different to the previous question. You'll see on the top left-hand side of the question, next to the question itself, is a box. So this is a tick box. So all you need to do in order to respond to this particular question is put a check mark in that box, and it will show as completed. However, it's worth just thinking about this whole issue, that it's about confirming that your organisation ensures that everyone who joins the organisation has appropriate training for the level of their role in both data security and cyber security. So it's about making sure that whatever's within your induction process, it covers the appropriate areas. So the comments box within the DSPT is entirely optional. You don't have to put anything in the comments box. However, it can be useful to reference where information might be, so that if someone else completes your DSPT in the future, they've got a reference point in terms of where things are, where it states what you've completed within the toolkit, etc. And I will just mention here that within the question itself, you'll see sort of in the center of the slide, there is some blue text that says Digital Care Hub. And I said I would be referencing that again, because if you were looking for the sort of information that should be in your induction program, if you click on the link within the question, it will take you through to the Digital Care Hub, where there are all sorts of resources around staff guidance on data sharing and various training resources as well that you might want to use as part of your induction process for staff. And that's all completely free. So once you're confident that you're able to respond to this question appropriately, you would check the box, click on save, and the question would show as completed. I would just go back to where it states what should happen and how it should happen. As part of the induction, the government are working on the care workforce pathway, and that will set out clearly what a career in social care means and what the various levels within should contain. And within the new to care role category A, it's planned that that will include using and managing data and data security. So if you're new to care, data security is a key component, and the arrow pointing to the right-hand side there is indicating that within the care certificate, it already states about understanding the importance of data and cyber security, the personal responsibility for handling data, that what the types of threats are to people's data, both physical and digital, and who to speak to in your organization. So again, who is the named person who's responsible for data and cyber security, etc. So clearly, both within the existing care certificate and within the care workforce pathway, data and cyber security are referenced as part of the induction for new staff. So what should that training cover? So clearly it's about the importance of data security, the National Data Guardian's data security standards, and what that says about people's personal responsibility for ensuring the safety of people's data. The applicable laws, GDPR, Data Protection Act, Physical security, making sure that where personal and confidential information is held, that it's held appropriately and securely. How we make sure that's safe. What is a data breach and how to report data breaches. Using social media and the dangers of malicious software, phishing, and all of the cybersecurity elements there. So it's about checking that all of that is covered within your induction training in order to be able to respond in the affirmative to the particular question. So having ticked the box, clicked on save, you can move on to the third of the questions here. And again, this is mandatory. Do all employment contracts and volunteer agreements contain data security requirements? So again, it's a tick box response, and it's about the contracts and agreements that you have for staff, volunteers, etc. Making sure that they reference the data security requirements, because that's what gives you the performance management element of people's behavior and practice within the workplace. If it states in their employment contracts, for example, that this is what they should do, that if they fail to do so, you have some comeback in terms of your management responsibilities, etc. So again, tick box question on the top left-hand side there. So you would tick the box, make any comments you wanted to make, if applicable, within the comments box, and that question would show completed. In terms of whether or not you wanted to check whether you've got the appropriate agreements within your contracts, there is a sample contract clause, again, on Digital Care Hub, which you can access via the link within the question. Just stating that briefly, that within the employment, you must not disclose trade secrets or other information of a confidential or sensitive nature that relate to service users or employees. And again, as I say, this is really just designed in a fairly succinct way in order to give you some ability to manage people's behavior and make them aware of the fact that they have these responsibilities. In terms of data breaches, it's worth just mentioning that when we're talking about data security, we're talking about several elements, that it's not just confidentiality, as you can see on the left-hand side of the triangle there, but it's also about the integrity of the data, the accuracy of the data, and it's also about the availability of that data. So it's making sure that all three sides of that triangle in the awareness of the people that are signing those contracts, that they know about confidentiality, they know that the data that we record and the data we process should be accurate and up to date, and that they know what they're allowed to access and what they're not allowed to access within that data agreement, etc. So having ticked the box, click on save, we move on to the next question, where it asks, has a training needs analysis covering data security, protection and cybersecurity been completed in the last 12 months? So there's several elements within this. It's highlighting the fact that your organization should be aware of what training people have had, what training they require, and the fact that training in this area is not just within induction, that it should be part of your ongoing refresher training for staff, etc. So again, if you haven't currently got a training needs analysis that covers data protection and cybersecurity, then there is a link there to the Digital Care Hub where there is an example training needs analysis that you can download and adapt for your organization if necessary. So we've looked at two types of question previously. The first one was a text box where you simply type in your response. The next few questions were tick box. This question is slightly different in that you'll see down on the bottom left-hand side of the section there, it gives you 4 options. You can either upload a document, reference an existing uploaded document, specify a link, or enter text describing the document's location. Most people that I've worked with on the DSPT tend to click on the bottom of those links, the enter text describing the document's location, where they can simply type in that the document is within the training file in the office, etc., or whatever the appropriate response is. So you would then, having entered your text, you would then click on save and the question would show as completed. And the next question again relates to staff training, and again it relates to your training needs analysis and being aware of where people are at in terms of what training they've had, what they require, etc. So this question states, have at least 95% of staff, directors, trustees and volunteers completed training in this area in the last 12 months? So again, it's making the point that it is part of your annual refresher training, not just a one-off activity, and that it applies to everyone within the organisation. So at least 95%, hopefully you'll be aiming for 100%, but it is a tick box question. Excuse me. So if you're confident that you're up to speed in terms of staff training in this area, all you need to do is to tick the box, click on save, and the question is completed. And just in terms of confirming what I've been saying about the need for the mandatory training, within the guide from Skills for Care on core and mandatory training, in relation to the recording and reporting, it talks about understanding the need for secure handling of information in settings, know how to access support for handling information, and handling information in accordance with agreed ways of working. So we're talking there about your policies and procedures, etc. And that it's within the previous key lines of inquiry, CQC's fundamental standards. So clearly, the toolkit has been written in a way that leads you to comply with the requirements as set by Skills for Care and CQC, etc. So having put in your response to the question, clicked on save, move on to the next question. Have the people with responsibility for data security and protection received training suitable for their roles? So you can see we're talking about 3 different levels of training. We've got the induction training that applies to all staff joining the organisation. We've then got the annual refresher and update training as part of that. And then for people with particular responsibilities, so for example, your information governance lead, it's checking that they've had the additional training that might be required in order for them to fulfil their role appropriately and adequately around data and cybersecurity. Again, it's a tick box, so you just need to check the box on the left-hand side there, enter comments if there are any to be made, and then click on save, and you'll be able to move forward. And then question 411. Does your organisation have an up-to-date record of staff and volunteers, if you have them, and their roles? So this may sound as though it's a bit unnecessary. Which organisation wouldn't know who worked for them? However, it is appropriate because as part of your data protection responsibilities, you need to know who in your organisation does what, and therefore that dictates what level of access they should have to personal and confidential information, because the Data Guardian standards state that we should only be allowing people to have access to information if they require it in order to fulfill their job role. So not everyone should have access to everything. It's about ascertaining what level of access they require. So for example, the gardener doesn't need the same level of access to information as a senior nurse. So it's about identifying what levels of access they need and ensuring that the appropriate security measures are in place to ensure that that is upheld. So assuming that you do know who works for you and what they do, then you'll be able to tick the box on the left-hand side, click on save and move forward to the next question. So that's all of the questions in section 1 of the toolkit. So I'm going to stop sharing at this stage and offer the opportunity to have a quick look at the toolkit itself or to answer any questions.